Alrighty, hello everybody, and welcome into my favorite time of the year, even though for a lot of people this is the worst time as you wait on the bubble, the final CFP committee as we decide the Season 14 playoff. We got a packed house here for the committee meeting. We got Zach, D-Sleep, Yui, Jackie Moon, and Nick in here, as well as myself, Coach DC. As always, just to re-explain the rules, we now have the full resume for each and every person or program at this point, so we consider conference championships, head-to-heads, all that good stuff. We also are going to consider seeding, so we gotta do the auto bids, which the top 4 seeds go to champions only, and then you have the 2 automatic qualifiers who don't get a first round bye automatically get a home game. And then we also want to make sure each quadrant is not stacked by only conferences in one full quadrant, and we want to try to avoid rematches. So we'll just go through that as we go through the seeding. If you have any questions about the bracket or anything while we go through it, let me know. But let's get started. And as always, do you guys have any anything different than Oklahoma 1 and Maryland 2? They both won their conference championships.
No, I think those are the easy ones to plug in.
Yeah, I think it's fair. I did think maybe maybe
Whoa.
TCU might have an argument for 2 after blowing out Nebraska, but
I did want to see at least compare TCU and Maryland because
Buffalo.
I do think Maryland, while being undefeated, is incredibly impressive. I do want to make sure that they have the wins that are like, okay, this is by far and away the team. And
yeah, they have Ohio State on the road, Michigan, and then a couple other middle tier wins like Michigan State, Penn State, Iowa, and Minnesota. While TCU TCU is more impressive with the wins, as you can see. I just don't think that historically that we can jump a Power 5 undefeated.
Yeah.
I disagree. It's gonna be a mute point because I don't think I think the majority is gonna say, okay, well, we're gonna go with that anyways. There's only 4 non-bowl eligible teams, and there's 5 ranked teams on this schedule, along with a few of these being like blowout wins, a few of these being like you have a playoff team that's in this race right here, that's in this kind of schedule right here, right, or probably a playoff team in Texas A&M, right. I understand that they have a loss. The loss was a close one to kind of a rival, like an in-conference rival that is Baylor. Like, that's a pretty impressive. They're ranked, right? I know they're not like so impressive this season, but I would pick TCU here, but I have no qualms about Maryland here either.
The reason I tend to feel more strongly about Maryland too is just because when you look at the games that TCU has won and played and the games that Maryland has won and played with like those, bowl eligible ranked teams, so teams like Ohio State and Michigan, who we currently have ranked above Baylor, they played those games close. They won those games somewhat similarly to the way that TCU has played some of those other bowl teams. So because to me, they do look just like they are a very similar team, I'm going to go with the edge to a team that didn't lose to one of those ranked teams, just because I really don't find another way to strongly differentiate between these two. Between these two.
I think point differential is like insane for Maryland too. So like I said, I have no qualms with it. But my vote would be for TCU just because of strength of schedule. But I understand, it's basically 2A, 2B for me.
Yeah. I think if it's real life, we'd go TCU. But in the SFA, historically, even with a G5, even if they're undefeated, they always end up top 2 anyways. We did it with UAB. We did it with Buffalo. We did it. So, yeah. I mean,
TCU in its last year.
And like I said throughout the season in the Patreon stuff is that we've only coming into the season seen an undefeated season like this going into the playoffs 7 total times. So I think we should reward Maryland. Now, in terms of seeding now, so obviously Oklahoma's number 1. Now, that decides the path of the bowl game. So Oklahoma, are they closer to the Cotton Bowl or Louisiana, the Sugar? I believe it's the Cotton
Bowl
Bowl.
by a lot.
Okay.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right. So
Where's the
one.
Cotton Bowl at? Dallas.
Dallas.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so the Cotton Bowl will. So finally, the Peach Bowl is not going through the 1 seed. So that means Maryland, who is definitely going to be closer to Atlanta than Louisiana. Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Yeah.
Maryland will go through the Peach. And then we are all pretty much unanimous TCU 3. Is that right?
I feel
Yep.
really good
Yeah.
about it.
Okay, so that means
Them
they
being any
will
lower
go,
would be silly.
they will go to the Sugar. Because there's no way they're closer to Phoenix, right, than Louisiana.
No, they are definitely
Okay.
closer to.
Well, just
New Orleans.
because Texas is like a
Huge.
billion,
Yeah.
a
no,
Fort
billion
I-
miles long.
is less than an hour from Dallas. It's the
Okay.
same urban area.
Gotcha. So now this is where it gets tricky because this Final Four spot, it has to go to either Buffalo, Washington, or App State. Now, Zach, you can't talk, but I think that App State they don't have the schedule to get a first round bye. And so I think it's down to Buffalo and Washington. Does anybody
I agree.
think App
I would
State?
agree.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now the problem here is Buffalo is 12-1. They have great wins. I mean,
Oh.
they've struggled a little bit, but the head-to-head versus Washington, and I think you have to honor it.
I'm
You're
not
talking
so
about
sure.
a first-round bye.
I'm not so convinced on that. I'm happy to entertain it. I'm happy to talk about it. I think that Washington, 2 of their wins were, I think their only ranked win is against Arizona, right? I know it was twice, which is always somewhat impressive, but you have, other than that, I mean, Oregon and Utah are the only bowl wins they have. They lost at Clemson, who ended up being horrific. I don't know. I personally, like, if we go back and look at Buffalo's, I think there's a reason we put Buffalo above them, and I think Buffalo looked more impressive in their conference championship game than Washington. I understand the precedent. Real quick, I just want to see, because
And just to make sure, Zach can also now come back in
Yeah.
now that we've narrowed it down,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
so
Cool. I want Buffalo here.
I think
Whoa.
that you have wins over 3 potential playoff teams right here. I say that, but again, I know that, like, I would say probably 2 of those teams are going to make it in, probably. So, like, let's say 1.5 playoff teams, right? Whatever. 1.5 playoff teams here that you have wins over. I understand, like, your best loss is on the road at Washington. I understand the head-to-head, but I think generally the wins and the overall schedule, common opponent. You could also pull up common opponent on Clemson and say, like, oh, that's a common opponent, right? There's a few ways you could slice it where you can definitely justify Buffalo, especially since we ranked them above Washington last week, and Buffalo looked more impressive in their conference championship game. I personally would go Buffalo. I'm not trying to just go against the grain here. I genuinely, I think I would go Buffalo based on strength of schedule and all of that good
that's
stuff.
correct, but for me, it's 14 points. A
Mm-hmm.
14-point win. They didn't have backup quarterback or anything. Like when you have 2 Power 5 champions and you're battling for a final first round bye, and you have a direct head-to-head, how do you not honor that? Is my question.
Because of the rest of the resume, right? We're looking at the full resume. I understand that it's like, yeah, we're looking at, head-to-head's a big indicator, but I think, like, I think just narrowing it down to that one game and not looking at the full resume whenever we're talking about who should have the season, 14 first round bye, right? Like, I think that's, like, we have to look at it in terms of, like, who has the best overall resume, because that's what we have to do that. You know what I mean?
I will say, over our past 2 meetings, we have consistently ranked Buffalo above Washington.
I personally also had Buffalo, and that was because I was, and this can be my hot take or crazy take. I originally, before rechecking resumes, I was more so considering the 3 spot between TCU and Buffalo more than I was considering Buffalo and Washington. Obviously, now looking at the resumes again, there is a pretty good gap between TCU and Buffalo, but I had Buffalo there in that consideration. So for me, I feel like there's a sizable gap between the two. I know Washington won the head-to-head, but at like the same thing that Nick said, using rest of schedule, I don't think that Washington holds up the same as Buffalo does over the entire course of the season. I think they had the better week 6, but I think that Buffalo had the better rest of season beyond that 1 week.
All right, well, I'm outvoted, so my only other point is that purple teams are better than blue teams.
That is
Well,
a good point.
Okay, you know what? I'm not going to argue you're wrong on that one.
That last point is correct.
But it's
All
not
right.
quite enough. It's close, but not quite enough to flip me.
So now here's the problem is, well, I don't know if it's a problem, but so Buffalo's at 4, they'll go to the Fiesta Bowl. So now we talk about the seeds 5, 6, 7, and 8. They are getting home games. You have to rank Washington in these 4. You have to rank Appalachian State in these 4. And then we can introduce 2 home at-large games. So where do you guys want to go? Do we go Washington 5, even though they would then be in that quadrant with Buffalo for a rematch? Or do you guys want to go elsewhere?
I'm willing, because I think obviously, I think the discussion at this point is between ECU and Washington. I think ECU, I had kind of ECU and Washington as like my 5 and 6 interchangeably. There are definitely 2 that I wanted to look at, because I think there's a pretty big gap after ECU.
Yeah, I think ECU here, and we avoid the rematch problem. Buffalo and ECU haven't played yet this season.
Oh.
That is true. And remember, you do have to consider, if you put Washington here, you have to worry about the rematch. But also, if you put ECU here, you have to worry about that number 12 team can't be an ACC team then. So we got to kind of jigsaw it together once we know our teams.
That's a
I
fair
think
point.
for now, I definitely think you go. And like I said, I just want to see ECU's schedule again. Win at Cal, which is a common. I think it's a common.
Yeah,
opponent.
it's a common opponent. Washington
But both of them.
lost.
Oh, Washington did lose. Okay, so that's interesting. Again, it's kind of the same way with like Buffalo, where it was like, okay, there are playoff teams on this that they have won against, and I think that justifies
Clemson.
both positions over. Yeah, and then like another. Yeah, so like common opponent is Clemson, common opponent is Cal. I think you put ECU over Washington. Washington falls into the 6.
So just to make sure that I understand correctly, if ECU is here, does that mean that ECU and Buffalo are the only 2 ACC teams at all, or does
No,
that just mean
in this
that
quadrant.
just means okay?
There can't be 3 ACC
Yeah.
teams in one
Well,
part of the bracket.
Yeah.
We can,
I
but
think you
we
guys
want to try to avoid it.
And it was
Possible.
more so that I just wanted to make sure we weren't completely locking out the rest of the ACC with
no.
that choice. So that was
I
what I
think-
just wanted to clarify.
I'm gonna be honest. I think you guys might complete, because you have 3 ACC teams that are all competing for that 11-12 area. I feel like you guys are almost locking. Like, I think it makes. I don't know.
I think the
it's
point.
silly.
So the point isn't that it's like, okay, hey, we might take a team out of the playoffs. I think it's more so that like, hey, we might switch around seeding for matchup purposes.
Okay.
It's not like,
Yeah, I
hey,
think-
we're gonna take one out. Like,
Yeah,
yeah.
so
you know.
it's more so that like, hey, this ACC team that it would the same way that in like the real life NCAA tournament, BYU had to move from the five seed to a 6 seed to avoid playing on Sunday. Same thing would happen here with an ACC team. If we had them at that 12 spot, we might swap them to the 11 just for seeding or for bracket reasons.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
What a fun
We'll still
fact.
do
I
some
didn't know
bracket
that.
engineering.
Well,
Yeah.
with 3 ACC teams, I think
So,
you're gonna
yeah.
be hard out of luck.
Yeah, well, let's focus on getting the best teams, and then we'll focus on the bracket after, because
Yeah.
we're probably gonna
Absolutely.
have some weird stuff, as pretty much our entire bubble is ACC and SEC. So it's all right. So right now I have Oklahoma at 1, Maryland at 2, TCU at 3, Buffalo at 4, East Carolina at 5, Washington at 6. And so that leads number 7 and number 8. Now, App State has to be one of these teams.
Right.
I am under the impression that they would go into the 8th spot just on their strength of schedule. I know that they just combated their only loss, but at the same time, like we've said over the last couple of weeks, this entire stretch after the Army game, there's just nothing.
Yeah. I can
Yeah.
agree with that. I think that you either put LSU or Texas A&M at the 7. I think we
Agreed.
compare those resumes. I think we compare I think we just compare the LSU A&M resumes right now.
Okay, so yeah, and just to make sure, so based on our last week rankings, LSU didn't play there at 7, or A&M didn't play there at 8, and then we had Tennessee and Georgia Tech at 9 and 10 play. They both lost, and then UNC and FSU at 11 and 12 did not play. Okay, so let's compare SEC teams.
Now, with LSU and Texas A&M,
They
I
have
do know
that
the past few times we've looked, yeah, we've gone LSU here.
Yeah, and I don't see that
The head-to-head.
changing. Yeah,
Now they have the head-to-head. Now, let's see though. They have one extra loss. They do have the win at Baylor, and the win over Tennessee.
Common opponent in OU. I think LSU held up a little bit better. I think this is negligible enough to where we remain with our current selection. I know that like 10 and 2 versus
9 and 3.
9 and 3 versus plus with the head to head. I think it's enough to justify giving LSU the home game here personally, just because I think that we remain consistent in our rankings. Neither of them played this week. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense to switch them, especially with their records in the head to head. I think LSU is the choice here personally.
Agree.
I would agree as well.
That Kentucky loss. And
Such a black
then-
eye.
Yeah, and then the OU. And they lost all good teams. Yeah, it's just one more loss. Okay, so LSU at 7 right now. And then that would mean App State at 8.
Mm-hmm.
And that means that we're going to get the base if we put at A&M at 9, App State and A&M. And that would then put the potential rematch
my
in the second
God.
round between OU and A&M.
I really like the idea. I like the Beavers versus Saunders matchup.
That quarterback room, like that
Yeah.
part of the bracket with Rimmers, Beavers, and Saunders is ridiculous.
Yeah.
The Ers.
Okay.
There's
So now this is where it really gets incredibly difficult.
adjective.
Let's see. So we got 10, 11, 12, and we basically have 1, 2, 3, 4,
Adverbs. Sorry.
5 teams for 3 spots, unless you guys just want to eliminate Ohio State.
Not off rip.
Not off rip. I mean, I can't really talk a lot at this point. I think both me and Jackie kind of have to pop out at this point because I think this is the tier where you're talking about Georgia Tech, Tennessee, FSU, OSU, and there's one more that I'm missing.
UNC.
UNC. So I think I'm gonna step out of the conversation here. I'll wish y'all luck.
So we got 3 spots. Okay. Where should we start?
I'm tempted to say Texas A&M, just because we've previously said this is the best
had
3-loss
them at
team in
9.
the country. Oh, did we already lock them in at 9?
For now,
think-
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that works for me.
I think all chalk, because like I said on the playoff push, is like all chalk. You're at 7 and 8 going into the conference championships. We did all the big time teams won. We didn't really find out anything new. So yeah, I think that you have to honor those rankings because now at this spot is where last week we ranked Tennessee and Georgia Tech, and then they both lost. So
Yeah.
now we have to evaluate. So we have, first off, we have Tennessee. And now here, I think we figure out our 3 teams, then we seed them just because we have
Mm-hmm.
SEC matchups, whatever. But
I'm gonna
so,
just
okay,
write down the list of this bubble group
Yeah.
to this.
Okay, so basically what we're deciding is Tennessee at 9-4 versus Georgia Tech 9-4 versus UNC 9-3, FSU 9-3, and Ohio State 9-3.
Okay. We're
what-
not going to talk about Arizona at all.
No, they are
No,
gone.
I think we kind of said last week it was winning in, losing
And all
out.
right,
And
yep,
then-
that works for me.
Losing.
And then we kind of eliminated
Michigan,
Michigan
Coastal,
based off
Army,
the game.
Yeah.
So,
All right,
okay.
I like this group.
All right. So here's Tennessee. The loss to Louisiana, who are the Conference USA champions. Now, he did have an injury here, right? The head-to-head win over Georgia Tech, so that's probably going to come into play here. Win over Auburn has gotten a little bit worse than it was. They do have that head-to-head loss directly to A&M, so that's that. The win over Central Michigan isn't much. They lost to ECU at ECU. The win versus Georgia, and then they lost by 1 point to Oklahoma. An impressive showing.
Yeah.
Now moving on.
It would have been easier if they hadn't done so well against Oklahoma despite losing.
Yeah, now Georgia Tech, they have the win over Army, but Army's not a champion at this point. They do have that direct loss to Tennessee. They lost directly to UNC, and then they beat ECU, though. That's going to be the best win out of any team we talk to, because Washington and Baylor are not in this conversation. So East Carolina at ECU for Georgia Tech is the best win. Florida State, that's another head-to-head. So, ironically, Georgia Tech has played everybody on the bubble except Ohio State. And then they also lost directly to Georgia, and then the Buffalo loss. And Buffalo is on a backup. Now moving on to North Carolina. They have that head-to-head over Ohio State. They have the head-to-head over Georgia Tech. NC State loss is kind of equal to the Georgia loss. They lost to ECU by 3. They also lost to Buffalo. And then a Notre Dame win here. And then that's pretty much it. And then, where's FSU?
There they are.
9-3. The Kent State loss, 5-7. That's the worst loss at any of these teams so far. NC State, though, Miami, Syracuse, Notre Dame. 2 direct losses to Georgia Tech and Buffalo. Then they beat Clemson, beat Pitt, beat BC at the end. There's so many quality wins on this schedule, but no top shelf wins. And then finally, just to look, Big Ten, we've got Ohio State. Lost to Georgia as well. Lost to UNC head-to-head by 1 point. Beat Texas, lost by 3 to the Terps. And then Iowa, Penn State, Minnesota were their wins. Michigan State, and then their big win is Michigan.
Okay, I have my 3.
You have your 3? I have
I have
to
my 3.
I have nowhere to start. Okay, so we have what is this, 5? And we're whittling down to Well,
Yes.
I think Ohio State is eliminated.
I was about to say, if we were gonna knock one out just to knock them out, I would knock out Ohio State.
Yeah.
So every playoff team they lost to or beat, I put an up or a down arrow next to this group of 5 teams. And Ohio State and Florida State were the ones who had the most names.
The most ups or the most downs?
Most downs.
Okay.
It's so like Tennessee and UNC both came out only 2 positives. Georgia Tech, with 2 positives, 4, and then Georgia Tech came with negative.
Honestly,
They end up kind of being that top 3, and it feels like the right top 3.
I mean, honestly, for me, out of these 5, the team that I think is probably the best, or I don't know about the best, but should be in, is probably Tennessee. I just don't think we can knock them out for a 1-point loss against Oklahoma.
Yeah,
That
that was the best game that anybody's played against Oklahoma this season.
Yep.
and it was a backup quarterback, Boss Hennessy as well. Like, yeah, I just don't think if we're gonna put a 4-loss at-large in, I guess Tennessee fits that bill. Now the question becomes, is these other two, because now we're going 3 ACC teams if we are putting Tennessee in, which I think we are for right now. Now we're not going to seed them yet, but this is a bloodbath. So all right, let's dive into it. So Georgia Tech, the Army win is 1, lost to Tennessee directly, lost to UNC directly. Syracuse was a win. East Carolina was a win. FSU, they won by 4. NC State, and then lost to Georgia, lost to Buffalo. So I have 5 quality wins here. And then, obviously, all 4 of their losses are to good teams, except Georgia. So, moving on now to Florida State. You've got Syracuse and OT, NC State, Miami, Notre Dame, the direct loss to Georgia Tech, the 1-point loss to Buffalo. Georgia Tech lost by 7. And then Pitt, Boston College, and that's it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 quality wins. And only 3 losses. Now that Kent State loss is a bit tough. And then finally, North Carolina. You've got...
When was the Ohio State's good?
Yeah, Ohio State is 1. Georgia Tech as well. NC State, 2 losses. And then Notre Dame. So less quality wins. They only have 4, but they have the 2 best wins, really, besides the ECU win.
I'm typically against seeing a conference take over, a playoff system of any kind. I think Georgia Tech and UNC are the 2 best teams here.
I was gonna say I would say the 2 of all that we've looked at. I agree, Tennessee, and then UNC, and would be the 2 that I would be for sure on, and the 2 that I'm really up in the air on are Florida State and Georgia Tech. Those 2 I'm really having a hard time figuring out which one I would have as the last one in. I personally would have North Carolina in, and then the last spot for me personally debating would be between Florida State and Georgia Tech.
Since we're not talking about seeding here, we're just talking about Georgia Tech between North Carolina. Am I good to?
Yeah, you can jump on it.
Yeah.
Yes. We've kind of established, I think we all agreed that Tennessee is in. Am I safe in saying that?
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
Tennessee and North Carolina are pretty much in.
Okay. Do we all feel good about that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah.
Do we accept this?
We for sure have Tennessee in. Let's talk about the 3 ACC teams.
So I wasn't even sure Georgia Tech was going to get in the playoffs whenever we were talking about this, but I do think it's crazy that there are 6 ranked teams on there, and they defeated, I think, 2 of them, and one of them being ECU, one of them being FSU, which is so notable.
Yeah, but the problem for me is like you're 1-4 versus, or 1-3 versus playoff teams.
Do we want to look at
Or 2-4
teams like UNLV or
I don't think
I'm not
UNLV.
willing to look at
Louisiana?
UNLV.
No.
Okay.
Louisiana, just too many losses. I mean,
Too many losses in the G5.
There's a bad loss on here, and I'm pretty sure it's Houston. Yeah,
they had 8 of their regular season games were against quarter 4 teams. Like 8 of them.
Yeah.
Which is like
if their only loss was to
That's
Oklahoma, they
most
would
of them.
probably be in. But yeah, no, they're.
Yeah. I just want to make sure.
Can I look at? I know this sounds weird. Can I look at North Carolina's one more time just to see again? Okay, so win against Georgia Tech, which is huge. Win against Ohio State, which is huge. Only losses are against NC State, which is not a terrible loss. and then East Carolina and Buffalo, which are obviously very quality losses.
And but like
man,
similar to Georgia Tech, do we want to like serve them up on a platter to these playoff teams that we've seen them lose against?
Well, the thing is like
they're good,
but they have
Yeah.
won a couple of these games, and I think what I'm really I hate, dude. Why is this every single season we have like a committee member that's like, I hate this. I hate whenever this happens.
I just like also for Georgia Tech, the thing about them is like 2 straight losses. You lose to Georgia, and then you lose to a backup quarterback at Buffalo.
I'm not
Like,
disagreeing.
they're not coming in on a hot streak.
no,
You know,
they've been down.
like, what do I care most about? It's wins. I always want to see who have you beaten, right? Like that's what I always say. That I'm always like, who have you beaten? I think the only team without huge wins here is Florida State, and I hate to say that. But they don't have a big win. Their biggest win is Boston College, which is not a bad win.
But
Do not get me wrong.
Have a
That's
bunch of them though. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
I
They
don't
have
disagree.
they have a bunch of good wins, but they don't have that great win. I'm guessing that's kind of what you're
That's
trying to
kind
say,
of what
Nick.
I'm saying. Like, yeah, they don't have like, I mean, they don't have a ranked win, right? And they also, of all these teams, have the worst loss in Kent. And so I'm just,
Please continue. Sorry.
as much as I want Florida State to be in here, because I do think that they have had a wonderful season, and I want the best for Jackie Moon. I don't see a way that you don't put Georgia Tech or North Carolina in here. Like, and that sucks, but like, I have to look at wins. I have to look and see who you've beaten.
Struggling to separate these teams so much. Let's look at points for and points against. Let's see if that tells a story.
So 411 versus 407, and then 308 versus 290. So
yeah, it's about the same.
It tells
and
us
then
we got a very
UNC at
FSU
371,
slightly better.
227.
207 versus 203 or 103 or 117 versus 103. There we go. And then North Carolina, much better defense, but
it's just not like, that's just not enough for me. I think like,
I mean, you do have the direct head-to-head. My question is, do you punish Georgia Tech for 2 straight losses?
Yeah, they lost 2 in a row. Like,
well,
the vibes are bad.
I also don't love punishing teams for making their conference championship. I don't love that, because I think that happens a good little bit, and I think that like, it would be dumb for us to be like, well, they lost to Buffalo, they need to be out. And it's like, they were expected to lose to Buffalo. B, they won the division to make that into that game. And so like, I hate being like, oh, they lost 2 games in a row right at the end of the season. It's like, yeah, but they also played their toughest game at the end of the season because they earned it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I always have such a qualm with hurting a resume based on conference championship. And it's like, they deserve to be there. They did well to be there, but then it's like they get slashed for it, and I don't love that.
Okay.
So that's just my 2 cents.
So then
putting 2 4-loss teams in the playoff, though, that is icky.
It is a bit icky, but I think this is why scheduling is so important, right? This is why
scheduling is a lot harder right now.
Scheduling is a lot harder. I think that like having quality opponents is so important, because whenever you have those wins, like that's what I care about, is like, do you have those wins? And they do, right?
So okay, so now
are we?
Oh, go ahead.
How do we feel? I'm gonna go ahead and say something. Do we feel like Georgia Tech should be the second team we should lock in, along with Tennessee? Do we want to say no? Okay.
I think it's Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia Tech. I thought that's what was decided.
I feel pretty good about those 3. I mean,
those are the teams I wanted. That's my group.
I hate that.
Which
I'm fine with it, but I don't like it. I don't like 4-loss teams in, but
I also want to, and again, maybe this is a pointless stat. I'm looking back right now at the BearCave game, and Georgia Tech got a couple of late touchdowns to make it close,
Yeah.
but they were down 13-34 at one point and got literally like last minute. It was they got one score with about 4 minutes left, and then their very last score they got with I'm at 50 something seconds right now, and they still haven't scored their last score. So it was not as
Garbage
close. It was literally with 2 seconds left that they scored their last score. So
And
it was a two, I know that's not the biggest thing to take into account, but it was a couple of garbage time scores that brought that back from a 3 touchdown loss.
Well,
I think
Which-
it's notable.
yeah,
but-
and well, if we're talking about what teams are hotter, like Florida State
It's gotta be Florida State.
is way hotter than Georgia Tech. They lost by 4, and then they lost on the last play to Buffalo, and then they dominated 4 straight teams. Like that, does we got to figure out if
a
like,
good BC win.
like does that matter?
I
or
like
not?
Florida State. Like it's. I don't think we can be wrong here. I think we just have to figure out. Like Georgia Tech should
no
be
matter
on
what,
the back foot.
We're not going to be wrong, but we need to figure out what's right.
Yeah.
Like we've got to get pretty ironclad reasoning.
Well, if we also like Florida State had a 2-score lead over Georgia Tech in the head-to-head as well, but once again, it's on the road. They ended up choking, and then they also choked to Buffalo. Like both of those wins were close. Like if we like we said, if we talk about the against the spread metric that Jackie Moon has contributed to the playoff committee, Florida State is like the best team on for that. Like they blow out everybody and they play everybody close. Like they'll give you a good game.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's a moot point.
So yeah, sorry to add that complication. I thought that was notable because I
You're
remembered
No,
that game just not being as close as the final score showed, and yeah, it doesn't look like it was.
And it's a backup
that's
quarterback.
Yeah, and you're right. It is against a backup quarterback, and I think that's where what you guys said before of you don't want to punish a team for making their conference championship, but it's also hard to reward a team for getting essentially, a couple garbage time scores away from getting blown out in a conference championship.
when Florida they've got one black eye, but those 2 losses are by 5 points combined.
One thing that I was gonna say is that we consider whenever we're judging playoff teams in a sort of like side by side comparison is also eye test. On game day, I know that I think Georgia Tech only played 1 game and it was against Tennessee. They didn't look wonderful. What did Florida State play in a game day situation?
Yeah, they played Pitt
Yes.
and destroyed them.
destroyed
They
them.
also
Demolished Pitt.
played Notre Dame on game day where they won on the helmet drop. They were up 7 and Notre Dame threw the Hail Mary, caught it, dropped it, right? So that was a close one. I think this argument is completely eye test versus resume.
If it's this close, how could we not honor the head-to-head, right? Like
I'm of the same fruit.
if we're struggling this much.
What is the?
Right.
Do we
And
have the
for me-
FPI metric on there? What
Yeah,
is
let
it?
me.
The
I'll check out the
RPI
RPI.
The RPI metric has them Georgia Tech at 8,
Whoa.
Florida State at 9.
Does that have this game in there?
It does include, yes, it includes this game. Georgia Tech is 9-4. They're at the 8th spot. Florida State 9-3 at the 9th spot.
I think this is the most telling stat of the RPI that kind of sways me. Georgia Tech is 3-3. They're 500 versus tier 1 teams. They've played 6 tier 1 teams. They've won against half of them. Florida State has only played 2. They've lost to both.
and
By
the
5 points.
and they also and they're the one that has the tier 4 loss as well. Georgia
It's
Tech does have a tier 3 loss, so not a huge,
0.004 of a difference in our PI.
yeah, it's truly because where I'm struggling is like you said, it's kind of resume versus eye test. If you were to ask me who I think has a better chance at winning a playoff game based on how we've seen them play on game day and how we've seen them play these last few weeks, I would bet Florida State before I would bet Georgia Tech. But
it's the same exact argument though as last year, where we were all like, Arizona will give them a better game, but Illinois should go, and and then
I'm kind of still in that
Illinois-
boat too.
Illinois got destroyed by Alabama.
Because this was very similar to the conversation last year that left Arizona out, and it was basically, okay, Arizona, who have they played? They played like 2 ranked teams, and they lost, or like 1 ranked team. I think they only played 1 ranked team, and they lost to them or something like that. Like they beat most everybody they should have.
Let's go to a different screen here, because I know
Yeah, and
that this is a
obviously I
screen
wasn't.
that can help.
I wasn't able to be part of the committee last year just because I was busy, but I would have, argued Arizona in that one as well. So I can tell that I might just have a type when it comes to these last spot teams.
So Georgia,
Apparently they check
Tech-
the box the same way.
Georgia Tech 91-68. Now let's find Florida State. Kent State was also like week 2, 80-66. Like the difference.
Can I
in that-
ask Coach Jackie a question real quick?
I mean, depends what
Like-
it is.
Did you
Yeah,
make a playbook change after week 2?
I think that's like an objective thing that we can ask.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much that matters. I don't even know if he's here. Oh,
Yeah. I think I went more aggressive
I can check.
on play
Yeah.
calling, but I'm not quite sure.
If you just
Double
search
check here.
Florida State
Yeah.
updated,
Jackie.
you'll be able to see in the
I'm
playbook
just
channel.
looking at everything he sent.
Oh, dude.
Discord
Um,
lookup.
Yeah, if I'm being so dead ass, I think this is like the conversation that we were having
Yeah.
last season, where it was like, all right, can we find a way
There's no change.
that can we see if there's like
The-
anything that gives
yeah.
Florida or
I mean, the-
Arizona the nod, or
The,
you know what I mean?
The thing is there is this time last season, Arizona had no leg to stand on, despite what everybody wanted to say. But I mean, Florida State this year, they have 2 wins on game day. One was 45-14. They did lead by 2 scores against Georgia Tech. They had the lead against Buffalo until the final second on a screen pass. You know, like
So
are there
hard.
more? How many common opponents do these two have?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Can we check that?
Yeah, let me
Um,
figure this out.
All right, let's. It
I
would
still
be
stand
easier
by-
to compare that over here.
I unfortunately still stand by the fact that I think Georgia Tech has a better win. Georgia Tech has
They
a
do.
better worst loss. Georgia Tech has the head-to-head. Georgia Tech won the
So,
division.
Tennessee, so UNC.
But Florida State has the
Syracuse.
vibes.
Florida State does have
Yeah.
the vibes. I will say
They do. They just
I
seem
do
like
think-
they're good.
I do think Florida State would do better in the playoffs. I do. I also thought Arizona would do better in the playoffs last season. But I don't know that. I don't know that for sure. I have to look at what have you done over the course of the season.
They both play Syracuse. That's 17-13. I've just got to start nitpicking wins. 17-13 win over Miami's a little close.
Yeah, no, I mean, if you look at the resumes, I think you objectively have to pick Georgia Tech, but the whole thing with how they're playing right now, like, how is a triple option Georgia Tech gonna play in a playoff game on the road after a loss to Georgia and a loss to Buffalo? I don't know. And they choked.
So
They
and whoever
choked like a +5 turnover margin against Tennessee.
And
Either of
whoever
these teams deserve it more than anybody we've already put in.
and I know obviously we can't choose who goes in based off of who they'd be playing, but it would be whoever goes in here would likely be facing. Well, I was going to say would likely be facing Washington, but we do also have UNC right there, so we've got a lot of
the problem with
seeding's
this
going to get weird.
is that East Carolina is most likely going to have a rematch in their first round game because I played Tennessee, North Carolina, and Georgia Tech. The only team I have not played is Florida State out of those.
Line them up. There we go.
All right.
I know this is breaking from what we're already doing here. Do you want to compare UNC and Florida State?
I mean, we can, but also this one.
Yeah, it's just better. Like,
It's so
like
hard
they have
to,
the
knock it.
2-score win on the road at Georgia Tech. Also, the Ohio State win. Like those are the top shelf wins that we're missing. They don't have the horrible loss. Like this NC State loss is on par with the Georgia loss from Georgia Tech.
Yeah, plus I feel like they have the eye test over both Florida State and Georgia Tech,
Yeah.
so I'm kind of
Now
like...
they competed well with East Carolina, but they did not compete well at all with Buffalo. That's the problem. But they also beat Notre Dame. So
I think North Carolina gets in.
got a little bit more
regardless.
faith in them in a game day setting anyway.
this is
Like, should we just go with game day? This sucks. This is hard.
It is hard, and this was the conversation last season too.
Yeah, CD's gonna be horrible for.
Georgia Tech won their division.
Why don't we just expand to 13 teams? I think this would just solve all of our problems over the last
if we
two
expanded
seasons.
to
Yeah, but I do-
14, yeah.
Practice mode of FSU versus Georgia Tech. Winner practice mode gets
I
in
mean,
at the 12 spot.
Play-in game.
we can expand to 14, but we can't do it right now. We'd have to do it next season.
Yeah, can you imagine?
We were just like, we can't fucking decide. Everybody's going.
I think that if we set the president last season, we have to honor
Yeah.
the resume bullshit.
Who should go?
Yeah, so. But
Georgia
it's
Tech
4
won their
fucking
division.
losses. That's so
I know.
disgusting.
Was
Like,
there
if
a
we're
four
talking
loss
about-
game
if we're
last
talking
night?
about 4
5 to
losses,
really
let's
good
put-
team.
Let's put Baylor in, a team that's fun to watch.
No.
Please no, not Baylor.
Or 11-2 Coastal.
I genuinely, I'm down. They only lost to Troy. Troy's not in the playoffs. Who's gonna beat him?
All right, how do we do the seeding? That's the question.
I
think you have to, if we're talking about seeding, you have to flip ECU and Washington because we can't
can we
avoid.
see the bracket?
Can I look at Army? I'm just kidding.
Yes. I don't know how I can look at a bracket, but if we're going off of what I have here, in the top left, Oklahoma is the first round bye, and then the winner of App State and A&M faces them. In the top right of the bracket, you have Maryland at 2, and then the winner of LSU versus whoever we put at 10. And then
Probably.
3, in the bottom right, you have TCU, and then we currently have Washington at the 6 versus the 11, and then the bottom left would be Buffalo, ECU, and then 12. So I think
So here's the question: they're going to play ECU, right?
yeah, ECU is gonna have to have a rematch. So I
Who
think that-
gains more from playing ECU?
well, I don't think
I
we
don't
can
know.
consider that. I think if we're talking about seeding, we have to. The thing we can avoid is a all ACC quadrant. If we flip Washington and East Carolina.
Yeah, and that's definitely bracket engineering. Totally works out fine.
I think I'd be.
And then did Tennessee face LSU? I don't think they did, but I also
No.
don't want an SEC match in the first round. Like we typically
If,
like
if it can be avoided, right? I get
Right.
that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think
so-
though that like, are you like okay? So my thing about that is like, are you saying that like to avoid an all SEC, like you wouldn't put Tennessee and ECU as a first because we would want to avoid the rematch in the beginning, if at all possible. I know it's like very likely for
Well,
you that would happen.
the problem is that at this point, all three of these bubble teams, unless we put A&M against ECU, is gonna face East Carolina for the second time, because I faced
think-
North Carolina, I lost to Georgia Tech, and then I beat Tennessee right here.
Right.
So
I don't think you drop A&M because I think you kind of reward them for being the 9 seed and giving them
Yeah.
that kind of like worst home team, right? I think that's I think the top 9 are kind of set. I think there
Yeah.
is the chance of us flopping ECU and Washington if it comes to that. But I also don't really know exactly why it would come to that unless you just wanted to pair up an ACC team against ECU in the first round.
well, because
So-
unless
sorry,
we
no,
put
go ahead.
unless we put Tennessee at 12, then it would be Buffalo, and then it would be ECU versus an ACC team in the full
Yeah.
quadrant, and then that would leave the only ACC team left would be whoever we put at 10 or 11, and that's what we want to try to avoid if we.
I think in
can.
terms of Tennessee and LSU, I don't want to speak too much on it, but I think my thing is like we're wanting to avoid matchups, right? And if there hasn't been a prior matchup, despite them being in the same conference, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that matters too much.
They're already in playoffs.
Because now the only thing I would say is the 4 SEC teams, 2 of them are in the same quadrant, but I think that's fine because we have 4 SEC teams and then we would have 4 ACC teams. It's impossible to keep them all away from each other.
Right.
So yeah, okay. So I think Tennessee at 10 makes sense, as they were kind of the first team that we felt like should be over there.
So then we would have LSU Tennessee there.
Yeah, and then we have
And the
to
winner would play
decide.
Maryland.
Yeah, and then we have to decide what we want to do at 11 and 12. Do you want to put North Carolina ahead of Georgia Tech? I think that's probably the case.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
is
we
not
felt better about North
good.
Carolina.
God, dude.
Yeah,
So that means it's
They beat them anyway. That works.
that's an ECU North Carolina rematch in the 6-11.
That'd be fun.
Jesus.
I can't lie.
And then
that
winner
does
faces
sound pretty
TCU.
good.
You guys are. This is a team that lost to Georgia Southern. You think I'm gonna beat North Carolina? All right. So, okay. So just the way the bracket looks right now. Let's just go through this before we go to the rest of the rankings. All right. So in the top left, you have Oklahoma number 1. They are in the Cotton Bowl. Winner of App State and A&M goes to the Cotton Bowl. In the top right, you got Maryland at number 2 in the Peach, and they will face the winner of LSU and Tennessee, and that would be played at LSU. In the bottom right, you got TCU playing in the Sugar Bowl. They'd face the winner of East Carolina and North Carolina. And then in the bottom left, you have Buffalo in the Fiesta Bowl facing the winner of Washington and Georgia Tech. All right.
I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah. Okay, so that means Florida State would be at 13. And they are in the Cotton Bowl then. The only tie-ins left in bowl season is the top 2 user teams. So at 13, we have Florida State. And then we kind of gotta go down the list. Based on our ranking last week, Arizona is a CPU team. Ohio State's a CPU team. So it's okay if we rank Ohio State 14. I think that's fair and fine.
Yeah.
And then Michigan is CPU. Coastal, but they lost. Army, but they lost. And then Baylor and Nebraska. Louisiana.
Lost.
UNLV.
1. Did not play.
So I think we should just rank them, and then we'll just see what happens. I think that's...
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you just rank them. Don't worry about the matchup, and
Yeah.
then just see what the matchups are after the fact.
Okay. So after Florida State, who do you have? I think that this is where you go Ohio State.
Ohio State.
Yeah, Ohio
Yeah.
State was the 15 we were talking about in that discussion.
I would probably honestly I would go Ohio State, Michigan, and then Arizona.
Do we still think Ohio State, Michigan's that close?
Well, I think that Michigan has. I think this is.
They did have a
didn't
great schedule, yeah.
Yeah, they didn't play. They had some QB troubles. They weren't in the playoff discussion. But they did have. I mean, they beat Rutgers. They beat Troy, who's a champion. Texas State. Those are all shit. Michigan State, Northwestern, and then Penn State. Like, it's not insane, but like this is kind of.
Yeah.
They've been like
It's a
tier
good,
breaker.
solid P5 schedule.
Yeah, and then I think it's fine putting Arizona at 16. I mean, they 2 losses, R2, but they're in the same boat as Georgia Tech. It's just like they are not on their game right now. And that's kind of the thing is.
Coastal, Army.
Yeah, so at this point we have Coastal, we have Army, Baylor, Nebraska. Louisiana's the only one in this tier that won this week. And then you also have UNLV, Oklahoma State, Cal, Hawaii.
Is there anybody like on a ranking bubble we feel like we're getting?
I would personally. I don't have
Iowa
anybody on the
State
bubble.
was the
I
only
just-
team, but I don't think anybody's dropping from the rankings unless you want to completely drop Nebraska for getting smoked.
They did get smoked pretty bad, but they're good. Like, I know they're good.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think it's pretty clear cut who should go to the Citrus, and who should probably be ranked here soon is probably Coastal.
Yeah, I think they were very close to making the playoffs. They obviously lost that game very close.
I
and the
quite
only
like
other
them. I just
team-
don't know what Troy's doing to them.
Yeah, I mean, the only other team that's possible is like we'd either have to rank Army higher now, even though they lost by more and looked bad, or Baylor. Yeah, Baylor jump at 4 losses.
I think we can safely say Baylor's probably better than Army. No, they're 4 loss. Like, I don't think we ever saw Baylor.
How about
play
that?
that
How about them
bad.
UNLV Rebels?
UNLV is absolutely up for discussion here.
Okay, do we want to do this Cryo getting into the Citrus Bowl after us making fun of them? Let's see, 1, 2, the Fresno State win, 3, the loss to Troy, 4.
They also
I
lost.
was gonna say I personally would have Coastal over UNLV, but I do think it's worth looking at UNLV's schedule just to double check.
Yeah.
I mean, Hawaii, they're champion. I have no.
Their best
Why
win,
shouldn't
San
we move
Diego
them
State,
up?
who's 8-4, and I'm fine if you're willing to say that San Diego State's better than anything on Southern Mississippi or Coastal's schedule.
Mhm.
However, they have like
Yeah,
4
all of these
8-4
other
wins.
3 and 9s and 4 and 8s.
Yeah, there's a reason we didn't rank them
Hard.
high.
Yeah, they have,
What do they have? They
8 of
beat
their
1.
teams were tier 4 teams.
And I think like if you like, I don't feel like we screwed Florida State.
Drop.
But I feel like you want to reward them with a good, fun matchup, and I think CJ Irons gives you that.
Yeah.
I would agree.
So do you want to rank Coastal at 16? I think you kind of have to, since everybody else lost, unless you want to give Louisiana
I can.
the ranking above, but then Louisiana is
Also
like
lost.
a user that doesn't do anything. It's
I was
Maddox's
gonna say,
friend.
do we have a user on?
It's Maddox's
Okay, yeah.
friend, and
Yeah.
he texts him, but he doesn't do any team building.
Then
So-
I'd so much rather have Coastal.
Yeah.
I think, especially if we're talking, like if we're not talking, if it were playoffs, that'd be different. Bowl games, I think that an active user deserves
Yeah,
Citrus because I
the-
think,
the best bowl game, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
I do want to say real quick, Army is 6th in RPI rankings. I know they're 3 loss. I do
7
think they deserve.
points.
I'm gonna be honest. I don't
Yeah.
care about Army and the. I think our Army has like fluffed
I don't
up
think
the
in the
RPI.
Citrus. Yeah.
What are we? I can't believe that goal line
Yeah,
stand
7 to
either. That was
17.
ridiculous.
No, some wild play calling there by Coach MZ.
Okay, so Coastal. Now I'm fine putting
Coastal
Louisiana
16.
right behind them at 17.
Do we have Arizona in yet?
Yeah, no, shit, I don't. Okay, do you want
Yeah.
Arizona?
So
at
Arizona
16?
16. Yeah, Arizona 16. We still get Coastal 17, and that'll still give them the Citrus.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
I'm cool with that.
And then Louisiana after that, we said. Do we think Baylor or Louisiana is better?
I put Louisiana over Baylor personally.
So, I mean, it's basically the best win for Louisiana is Tennessee, and then the best win for Baylor is TCU, which goes to Baylor, but then do you value the conference championship above? And so last week we had Baylor at 19, Louisiana at 21. Is that enough to...
So in that case, Baylor would stay at 19. That would be the same rank we put them in last week. That makes a lot of sense to me for a team that didn't play, and Louisiana goes up 3, 4, even up 2 for winning their conference championship. That works for me.
Okay, so Baylor.
That's where I would personally go as well.
Okay, so now we have basically teams that we ranked last week in this final 5. We have Army. We have... hold on. What the heck? Okay, yeah, we have
I've got
Army.
19 teams dying right now. If anybody,
1, 2,
I may have
3,
missed
4,
one.
5. Oh, I missed a rank. God, I skipped 22. That's. I was like, how is it? How are these teams not matching up? Okay, so Army, Baylor, Nebraska, UNLV, Oklahoma State, Cal, and Hawaii are who we ranked last week. I think Nebraska drops.
Nebraska drops. I think we can safely say Hawaii deserves to move up some amount for being conference champs.
I was gonna say if you, for me personally, what I would do is, where we have Louisiana, and then I would have Baylor next, and then I'd have Hawaii right after them.
Hawaii 20.
Hawaii at 20 as champion.
Do you have Hawaii at 9-4 above Army? I don't know if you can stretch that. I mean, I know they are the champion, but
I think Army generally, I think we get really lost on ranked wins and stuff like that, and they only have 1 ranked win. They lost. But I think they have so many quality wins on their schedule. They just overall had a much harder schedule.
Hawaii had a very
Hawaii
hard
had
schedule.
a brutal schedule, yeah.
Now, do you honor the head-to-head with Cal? Or no?
Not after they win their championship.
Yeah, I mean, but this
Especially,
is another team that outside the UNLV game and the Fresno game, they lost to every team that was better.
And they lost to SDSU.
Yeah.
UE also makes the comment here just saying, I didn't even get ranked as a conference champion, so Army should be above Hawaii, which is a fair point. That if Army does have the better resume overall, that even with that conference championship, she's probably right that little bit more might be or that might not be quite enough to move the 5 spots, but I do think it should be Hawaii right there, if not above, personally.
Okay.
Yeah, I would go Army still ahead because it was close at the end, and they're in, and they were in quote unquote second place for the auto bid. So
Army 20 is what we're feeling, if I've sussed this out correctly.
I think
if we did Army 20, I would personally want Hawaii at 21.
Right, yeah, right under them.
And then and then after that, I'd put UNLV.
UNLV, maybe?
Yeah, UNLV, because they were 22 last week, and then you're just jumping for the head-to-head now.
And so that leaves us with
Nebraska,
OK State,
and Cal. Which I would keep OK
Cal
State.
23?
Well, we had OK State above Cal last week, so I don't know what would
Nothing changed. Yeah.
And just drop Nebraska down to 25.
Yeah, unless you want to put Iowa State above them. Because I believe Iowa State has the head-to-head, I'm pretty sure. Yeah, by a lot.
Okay. By a lot.
I would punish Nebraska here.
They got boomed.
He did get boomed.
They have the same points for, just a few points less, although they did play more games.
Which team has the vibes? Going back to vibes.
Neither. Both these teams have pretty rancid vibes. I guess I'd give Nebraska the edge because they have Dictator.
Yeah,
I don't know.
We're going to Iowa State versus... Oh, Iowa State for sure. Their game day game was so much fun.
Yeah, I was gonna say. I think I have the Iowa State vibes here.
Head to head. I'm cool with punishing Nebraska because they
I would
dunk
like
it up.
Yeah, because that was a big Steeler game, and they completely didn't even make it fun.
What's his name? Kennard Sanders or something?
Same overall, and they didn't do nothing.
What's the running back's name? Kennard
Sellers.
Sellers.
Kennard Sellers. Okay, so we have 25 here. So let's just reconvene to make sure we got it right. So number 1 is going to be Oklahoma in the Cotton, facing the winner of App State and Texas A&M in Boone. And then Maryland in the top right in the Peach, facing the winner of LSU and Tennessee at LSU. And then the bottom right, you got TCU in the Sugar, facing the winner of East Carolina and North Carolina. And then in the bottom left, you got Buffalo at the Fiesta Bowl, facing the winner Washington and Georgia Tech. And then at 13, you got Florida State. 14, you got Ohio State. 15, Michigan. 16, Arizona. 17, Coastal, who faces Florida State in the Citrus. And then you got Louisiana. 18, Baylor. 19, 20, Army. 21, Hawaii. 22, UNLV. 23, Oklahoma State. 24, Cal. And 25, Iowa State.
I have one small question, and if it's yes, then we're gonna have to tweak something. Do the top 2 CPU teams play against each other in a bowl?
Last year they did in the Outback Bowl. That was kind of the tie-in, but with the competitive scheduling, I'm not like honoring that tie-in anymore. But we can make
Okay.
it if we want to.
I was like, I don't want Ohio State and Michigan to play again. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, so we'll keep them ranked, but I won't put those two together.
It would more likely be Ohio State, Arizona.
yeah.
Probably.
that'd be way better.
Yeah.
That's a good matchup. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
a good
so-
matchup. I like that one.
We shall see. Yeah, and then I wanted to ask you guys what you think we should do for the release. Should we just do a release tonight so then I can post BearCave, because the bowl games are going to be on Wednesday, or I can put together a video tonight and then do like a premiere on YouTube while I'm at work tomorrow, and then I can post the BearCave. What do you guys think's better?
I tend to steer towards like reveal streamer or just normal reveal.
Because I can't do a stream tomorrow, because tomorrow's my only day where I can't do anything SFA until late.
Is it gonna be easier on you schedule wise if you just release them tonight?
Technically,
Honest to God,
yes,
I know
but
you probably don't give a
putting
shit.
Whichever you'd
together-
rather. It's
I
honestly.
mean, the only thing for the video is like I just have to spend like an extra hour like putting them into OBS and doing the release kind of like last year. But
I think it's so funny. You're just like, it's just like another hour of my.
well, the thing is also the bowl games. Like if it's just the rankings, that's kind of whatever. But I have to
Bowl
put together the
games,
bowl
yeah.
games. I have to snip them and figure out who goes where. So that might take some time.
I think we can do a normal release just so it's easier on you.
Yeah,
I think
'cause
it'll
then
kill the
bowl
hype or
games-
anything.
Well, the bowl games will be released also in like game previews, like one at a time as well. So that's
Yeah, it'll be good.
okay. I guess I
Yeah,
can do that.
that gets us to recruit
late.
faster anyway. So
Yeah.
If you ain't got
Well,
time to do stuff
recruiting's
about
already
it.
done. I was gonna release it yesterday, but I was waiting on 2 outcomes and for visits. So. And Zach, you
My bad.
use visits and you didn't have any.
Oh, LOL. My bad.
oh, you goofy goober.
Let me see. Recruiting. Is it? I should have 1.
Alright. So I'm gonna end the stream. Any last words before we cement the?
Oh, wait, no, I have 0 because I used one of E-Jack.
All right.
Oh, I think we're good to go.
All right.
Oh,
Oh, unless you got something, Nick.
Balls to the Natty. That's it.
No.
Okay, well, I guess we probably should
Rock
have ended it
Boys.
before
Rock
that.
Boys on top.